This video is going to be my final review of the Lee Cougan Crossfire 428. I've been riding this bike for a couple months. I've got the Lee Cougan t-shirt on and I'm ready to do this review. So this is a bike that is a cross-country bike. It's got 100 millimeters of travel. The fork is a 110. Now, currently in the United States, these are sold as a frame only. If you are interested, there is a way that you can get a complete bike. I'll talk about that at the end of the video. There's a few available that I have access to. When I go over this review, I'm going to talk about mainly how the frame rides. However, I am going to talk about some of the components on the bike because I think a lot of people will watch bike reviews to learn about components as well as the bike. The reason it's called the 428, and I don't think I mentioned this in my first look video, which I'll drop below if you're interested, is it's got 428 millimeter chainstays. Those are short chainstays, and the way that they've designed this suspension is it's basically got flexible seat stays, and that allows the bike to not have as many pivots. It allows them to get the rear end shorter, which personally I really like. I like a bike with about as short of a chainstay as you can get because it really helps the handling, especially in a cross-country application, and especially when you're racing cross-country or riding cross-country in areas where you have a lot of tight turns. It helps the bike really accelerate well. What I really like about this bike is how fluid it feels. I love the way the suspension feels on this bike. Now, it is a cross-country bike, so it does not feel like too plush. I've had other flexible seat stay bikes where it feels like the bike has more travel than the numbers indicate. For example, my Transition Spur. That is a bike that does not have a rear pivot. Again, the seat stays flex. That bike has 120 millimeters of travel, but it feels like it has like 130, or we'll leave it at 130, probably not more than that. I had a Specialized stump jumper, same kind of design, had 130 millimeters of travel, but it felt like 140. This bike feels like it has 100. I mean, it has 100 and it feels like it has 100. But the suspension is very predictable. It doesn't have a harsh ramp up. It doesn't have a soft mid-stroke, and it absorbs small bumps really well. And I felt like I could flow on the trails really well. It's got a 68.5 degree head angle, which I think is pretty good. Now, there are cross-country bikes coming out with slacker head angles, but with the 110 fork, I felt like the 68.5 was spot on for what this bike's designed for. I'll mention stem length, and obviously stem length doesn't really matter in terms of buying a frame, but this bike originally came with 100. The individual who brought me the bike as a demo was able to get me a 90, so I appreciate that. And it helped the handling better. However, I would probably run an 80, maybe even a 70. I'd go with a 70 on this bike. That's my preference. This bike really helped me understand how stem length affects the handling of a bike. The longer stem allows the bike to be a bit more stable in the corners. It's a more fluid motion. It doesn't snap into a corner quite as well as a shorter stem. For example, my Niner RKT9, my new one, has a 60 millimeter stem, and that bike feels pretty twitchy with a 60, even though it has a slacker head angle. So it was kind of cool to experiment with stem lengths on this bike. Longer stem, more fluid, not quite as snappy into the corners, but more stable in the corners. Shorter stem, it's going to feel like you can initiate a turn a bit quicker, throw the bike around a little bit quicker in the turn. So again, it's a matter of preference, but the 90 in here was okay. I'd probably go with a 70 or 80 if it were my personal bike that I was building up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of go over the components, what I think about them. This bike does have electronic shifting. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I'm actually making a separate video on my thoughts of electronic shifting because I've been using road and mountain bike SRAM electronic shifting, and I'll share my viewpoints, my experience, first time using it. But yeah, let's take a closer up look at some of the components of this bike and I'll let you know what I think. First, I'll talk about the remote lockout. So this demo bike came with a remote for the rear and also the front. On a bike like this, it was nice to have a lever that would lock out both the rear and also the front at the same time. So all you got to do is push that lever. Now you can push it halfway to give a firmer pedaling platform, or you can push it all the way in to completely lock it out. I would use it on fire road climbs and of course on pavement, and it's nice to not have to reach down, lock out both the front and the rear, especially when you hit a pavement section, right? So I had an open mind about the remote lockout and I ended up liking it. As I mentioned, I'll make a separate video on the electronic shifting, but overall, I liked it. I don't feel like it's a necessity for me by any means on a mountain bike, especially since I have other mountain bikes that don't have it, and sometimes it was a little hard getting used to the electronic shifting. Now, SRAM has a different type of lever also available. This lever was okay. I found myself doing a lot of misshifts because I was so used to mechanical, and my thumb would just go to the wrong place, especially to downshift to go into an easier gear. That being said, once you kind of just focus on it for a few rides, it becomes second nature. This Sella San Marco saddle, really good saddle. And like I said, I do these component overviews because some of you may just want to find out about different kind of components, but this is a super comfortable saddle, and I would recommend this saddle. It's one that I'll probably get in the future for other bikes. I just ended up really liking that saddle. One thing that I didn't care for are the Continental Cross King tires. They're not bad. I just felt like they were a bit sluggish for me. The tread just felt like it had a bit more drag than I'm used to with some other tires that I use. It's got a 2.3 in the front, 2.2 in the back, which I like that. It's a good width for a tire, but I just felt like these tires they just had too much rolling resistance for me, and they weren't that predictable when the terrain got really loose. So we get a lot of sand in the summertime when we get a lot of rain, and for some reason these tires were just not that predictable. So probably not a tire that I would run in the future. I would lean more towards a Schwalbe tire or a Maxxis. Personal preference. If you've used these tires, let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? The DT Swiss 1700 wheels were great. Pretty stiff for an alloy wheel set, so stiff laterally. When I did the first look, it looked like we were going to get these as a complete bike in the United States, and I said that the price was too high for alloy wheels, but now that they're frame only, that's kind of a moot point. Personally, I would run a pair of carbon wheels on a bike like this. It just really improves the ride quality, but the DT Swiss 1700s, pretty good wheel set. This was my first time using Magura brakes, and I really like them. The only downside is they may make a clamp for it, but you don't have the combination clamp like the Matchmaker where you can combine it with the shifter, and it was a little hard to get these set up, but once I did, these are a mineral oil brake that have, to me, the modulation of SRAM, but the benefit of using mineral oil. And then finally the handlebar, the FSA handlebar. It's a 760 width, really good width for a bike like this. And I really like the back sweep. It has a really nice bend to it, really nice curve. So that is a component that I ended up really liking on this bike. So that's my review of the Lee Cougan Crossfire 428. I like it, really like this frame. It is a fast, light cross-country frame that's unique because it's an Italian brand that's not real prominent yet in the United States. Now, if you're interested in one, check out their website for a dealer if you want to get it as a frame only. Also, I do have a few available through some circumstances, about 6 of them that I'll put on my website. I'll put the link in the description below. It's everyday-explorer.com. If you want to get this as a complete bike, I can get some pretty good pricing on them. Just something that I throw in there. I've never been able to do that on a review. I'm not doing this review because of that. It just happened to come about like today. I found out about it. So again, I'll put that on my website. So check it out if you're interested in getting a complete bike at a pretty good price. So with that, I'll end this review. If you've used one of these before, if you've ridden a Crossfire 428, please let me know in the comments below. I've not talked to anybody who's ridden one of these, and I want to see if you agree with me on how good the handling of this bike is. So again, drop that in the comments below. With that, I will catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.